Firewatch, Death Stranding, Slender. What do all these games have in common? They are modified walking simulators. Sure, Death Stranding has enemies and weight mechanics, and Firewatch has narrative choices, and Slender has, well, the Slender Man. But at the end of the day, the player simply has fun walking around in these spooky, sad, and loving playgrounds. This was the basis for my game, a tough stroll. So why did I make my first indie game a walking simulator? Well, I'm here today to answer that question. So what makes a walking simulator fun? I will be mainly showing you all the gameplay and music of Campo Santo's beautiful golden child known simply as Firewatch. In this game, you play as Henry, a middle-aged man with, let's just say, a lot of baggage. This leads him to wander the game's setting as a form of escapism. That is exactly the catalyst that inspired me to make my first game. That feeling of illustrious and sweet escapism. Campo Santo are incredibly successful at immersing the player in their world, since both Henry and the player are seeking a form of escapism immediately from the start of the game, due to Henry's baggage combined with our desire to use video games as escapism from the stresses of everyday life. The game starts with a clear motivator: to get Henry's life back together by taking up this summer job. I took this idea as a game that needs a motivator to keep the player going forward and not dropping the game. A game that does this well? The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. You as the player know that if you don't try and defeat Ganon, this gorgeous open world will be destroyed and the game would become a lot more depressing. A game that fails at giving you a strong motivator? For me personally, that game would be Sonic Forces. The game tries to convince you that Sonic is too weak to save the world, but only Sonic is trapped at the start of the game. In addition, all of his 500 friends are all extremely fast and durable, plus classic Sonic is in this game, so why bother fighting enemies that Sonic has easily overpowered beforehand? Nevertheless, walking simulators have a simple motivator in their storytelling, which is ultimately one of my passions and goals with games. I like to tell a story that will inspire more creation, so the game's motivator is simple. If you don't help your friends, then you'll be left all alone, and that may have a huge negative effect on your mental health. So of course, every player would try to prevent these issues like anxiety or depression, because nobody wants to live with those conditions. Now, the gameplay. As a games designer, my role is usually to play the director of a film, whereas a programmer would do the acting and the artist would make the costumes and scenery. This means that I'm not the most experienced with code. Despite this, I can understand simple code and terms like strings, booleans, and private voids. This all probably means nothing to you, but my point is I wanted to create a game that was feasible, given the 4 months of scope and time I gave myself. I set this deadline pretty early on, since it would firstly keep me working, and secondly, it would allow me to create a small game without too many unrealistic goals that my current skills lack. I knew that walking simulators were relatively simple to program, so I knew my game would be in that genre. However, the player would quickly become bored if there was no objective. Therefore, I added multiple endings and choice-based gameplay. Now, not only does this add replayability to see different outcomes, but it also works well with the storytelling nature of a walking simulator. This also worked in Firewatch, to the point where it feels more like an interactive movie than a game. Firewatch and my game might essentially be visual novels. The initial idea for my game was a hallucination game where the protagonist would see visions and the world would change based on your choices. I remembered the opening of Firewatch where the player clicks buttons to make choices, then the scene would cut to Henry walking around, then it would cut back to text and loop. I wondered if I could make a full game just out of Firewatch's opening, and I did. It's not a perfect game by far, but for my first solo game, I'm proud of a tough stroll. The audio was a key factor in making my game feel immersive and real. Audio and voice lines are what makes a game feel alive and full of life. If you look again at Firewatch or the Stanley Parable, as I'm talking over them, sure the games look pretty, but you aren't exactly feeling any emotions, and you may find it harder to understand what's going on in each scene. Now, I'm going to enable the voices and music, and you will feel the passion in 3, 2, 1. that sound engaging? This is why I chose my audio wisely. Now, I am the furthest thing from a composer, so in order to make the music sound half decent, I got in contact with someone I knew personally who understands music theory and how to compose the correct pacing, instruments, and pitch depending on the scene playing. My game was once again inspired by Firewatch, so I asked them to create something natural, no electronics as the game features no tech, only trees and plains. I wanted the music to be a calming lo-fi OST combined with some depressing classical music, to fit with the gentle tone of the leaves blowing in the wind. After all, if I put doom music over my game, it wouldn't seem as fitting, would it? Yeah, better to stick with soothing and gentle piano keys for now. My future plan is to create a game each year, improving on my past skills, since I am currently learning new skills such as 3D animation and level design. My goal is to add more depth and showcase my talents in bigger and better games. I will say that A Tough Stroll has no canon ending. Every ending is true, and it's up to you to decide. I don't want to make a sequel for the game, as I believe it is important for a game designer to keep their minds open and aware of growth, hence why my next game will not be in the same genre. If you only make first-person shooters your whole life, the games and potentially the mechanics will blend together, and by extension you won't learn nearly as many new skills, since you're just texturing the same gun, but with a slightly higher quality texture each year. This has been a devlog by Tuxedo Cat Productions. Thank you for listening and watching.